Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa and I'm the owner of seasonandserveblog.com. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make my homemade porchetta with salsa verde. Porchetta is an Italian roast pork dish that is made with pork belly and pork loin that is stuffed with lots of herbs and garlic and served with a delicious and refreshing salsa verde that is also made with herbs. In addition to showing you how to make this porchetta, I'll also be showing you how to make two side dishes, including these roasted potatoes with herb salt and these sautéed green beans with Parmesan. These are definitely some show-stopping recipes, especially for spring and Easter, so if you want to see how to make it, just keep on watching. To start off this recipe for my homemade porchetta with salsa verde, we're going to make the filling that'll be rolled up inside the porchetta. And we'll start off by chopping up some garlic. You need a lot of garlic because this is going to be a fairly big pork roast, so I'm using 8 large cloves of garlic. So that I'm going to place into a bowl, and then I'm going to go ahead and strip some leaves off some fresh rosemary. Now in this recipe, you do want to use fresh herbs for everything. The dried herbs will work, but the fresh herbs just give it such a nice lighter flavor. It is so delicious. So we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of chopped rosemary, and then we're going to add about 3 tablespoons or a quarter cup of chopped fresh oregano. And I'm also going to be adding some fresh sage leaves to this recipe as well. Sage might not be very traditional depending on where you are in Italy, but I really like it in my version of the porchetta. And of course, this herb filling wouldn't be complete without some fresh Italian parsley, and I'm chopping this up using both the leaves and the stems, making sure to chop it nice and finely as we do want to get it evenly distributed throughout the porchetta. Once the parsley is added to the bowl with the other herbs, we are going to grate in some fresh lemon zest. And this kind of helps just add a little bit of extra freshness to the porchetta and lots of flavor, obviously. So we're scraping the zest of 1 lemon into the herb mixture. And another key ingredient for porchetta is fennel. You're typically supposed to use fennel pollen, but since that's really difficult to find where I am, I just use fennel seeds, about 2 tablespoons, and this just adds lots of delicious flavor. And of course, we have to add our standard seasonings of some cracked black pepper and some sea salt. You do want to go heavy on the salt, and I use sea salt, so it is a little bit saltier than regular salt, but I use about 1.5 tablespoons. So you do need a lot to season all of this pork. To bring everything together, I drizzle over some olive oil and then mix everything to combine. Once combined, we'll set that aside and then we'll make room to bring in our beautiful pork belly and pork loin. And this pork belly was so big that I actually needed 2 cutting boards to prepare it. And I wasn't kidding, I definitely needed both of those cutting boards to prepare this, but since porchetta does require a little bit of work, you might as well make a lot of it and share it with your friends and family. So for the cuts of meat, I did get a pork loin and a pork belly, and since the pork belly had to be really large, this was a special order, so my local butcher, Key's Deli, did a great job in ordering this in for me, and it was delicious. So the pork belly will be a fairly large piece, and you want to make sure that the skin is still on it because that's how you get a nice, delicious, crispy crust. And you'll notice on the pork belly that one end will be a little bit thicker than the other. So take a look at your pork belly and see which end is thicker because we'll aim to trim that off. So before we fill this with our herb filling, we're actually going to trim the pork belly so it fits properly around the pork loin. So take the pork loin and place it on the thin side of the pork belly, and then gradually and tightly roll this pork belly around the pork loin. And once the pork belly is wrapped around the pork loin, you will see where it touches itself again. You want to make sure to trim that off. So I just marked this with my finger, and I'm just going to use a very, very sharp knife to trim this properly. And you want to do this because you don't want the skin to be wrapped around itself because it won't cook properly, it won't get crispy, and it's not that great. So as you can see here, when I re-roll the pork belly around the pork loin, the skin just meets up together along a nice bottom seam. So once the pork belly is trimmed to size, we are actually going to score the pork belly before rolling it. So pig skin is fairly thick and difficult to cut through, so you may need an actual razor, but I have a very sharp Japanese knife, and it is probably the sharpest knife I've ever owned, but this easily sliced through the pig skin, which is crazy. So I'm making several horizontal cuts across the pork belly, about 2 centimeters to 3 centimeters apart, and we're only cutting about 0.5 centimeter deep. And what this does is allows a lot of the fat to come out of the pork belly and helps render it really easily so it gets a nice crispy crust. So once the meat is scored, we're going to set that aside and then we're going to butterfly the pork belly. Yes, the meat preparation is not done yet. This part is optional, but it really depends on the size of your pork loin. But since mine was so thick, I wanted to make sure that I was able to get some herb filling inside so that I would evenly flavor the pork loin as well. So all I did was just lay it down and then butterfly it. I made just several long cuts across the pork loin. It doesn't have to be perfect at all because it is going to get rolled up, but you kind of see how I flattened it out. And now we can add our herb filling and then start wrapping this all up. So to the pork loin portion, I'm going to add about 1/3 of that herb mixture that we made, and then I'm evenly going to spread it out across the entire pork loin. And once that's done, I'm just going to roll it back up into its original shape with all of those herbs inside of it. Then we'll set that pork loin aside and then we'll lay out the pork belly once more. Now I'm going to add the remaining herb mixture across the entire pork belly, again making sure to spread it out into a nice even layer. And now comes the fun part of rolling this whole thing together. So I'm going to place the pork loin on one of the edges of the pork belly and then carefully and tightly roll that pork belly around the pork loin. And as you can see, since we trimmed it properly, the pork belly just meets up and it is just the perfect, nice porchetta all ready to go. Now to make sure that this doesn't fall apart when we're baking it, we're going to wrap it in some butcher's twine. And this is just 100% cotton string, and I'm just cutting some pieces, sliding them around the pork belly, and then just tying them in some knots. This will keep everything together and prevent the pork belly from unrolling or the filling from falling out. And you just want to do maybe like 5 or 6 of these across the entire length of the pork belly. And as you can see, I'm sort of nestling the string in between those slits that we cut on the exterior of the pork belly. This will help give a nice clean look and again help keep everything nice and together. So once the porchetta has been tied up, just simply trim the ends of the string with some scissors so that we don't have any string burning in the oven and we have a nice clean presentation. Now that everything's assembled, we can bake the porchetta. So I'm placing it on a rack in a nice large roasting pan and I'm sprinkling the top with salt. You want to make sure you do elevate the porchetta off the base of the pan just so that the pork doesn't stick and that all sides of the skin can get nice and crispy. Then we'll transfer the porchetta to the oven, and I have the oven set at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to bake it for anywhere between 3 to 5 hours. And during the last half hour, I actually cranked up the oven to 400 degrees just so that we got a nice crispy skin on the outside. And you know the porchetta is fully cooked when it has an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So once the porchetta comes out of the oven, I'm just going to lightly tent this with some foil and set it aside to rest for about half an hour. While the porchetta was baking, I did go ahead and make the salsa verde, but before I show you how to do that, I wanted to show you what the porchetta looks like when it's sliced. As you can see, those score marks really help you in guiding the knife through the porchetta, and once sliced, you can see that beautiful spiral of all the meat and the herbs, and it is absolutely delicious, and it has a beautiful crispy crust. Wow. Now, while the porchetta is delicious on its own, it's even better when paired with a fresh salsa verde. So to make this, I'm adding 2 cloves of garlic to a food processor, and I'm adding a tablespoon of fresh oregano. I'm also adding some lemon zest, and as you can see, we're echoing a lot of those same flavors that were put into the actual porchetta itself. And this is optional, but I do like adding a little bit of dried red chili flakes just to give the salsa verde a little bit of spice. And of course, we're going to add some salt and some ground black pepper, and then 2 large bunches of fresh Italian parsley, stems and all. And it's time for the key ingredient, which is actually red wine vinegar. I'm adding about 1/4 cup of red wine vinegar, and this gives the salsa verde lots of freshness and lots of tang. And of course, we do want to round this out with some olive oil, and then we're going to pulse that to combine. I went through these measurements super roughly, but if you go to my blog, you'll see all the full measurements and directions for both the porchetta and the salsa verde posted to my blog, so go ahead and check it out there. So once the salsa verde is prepared, I'm just going to place it into a nice serving bowl and drizzle the top with lots of olive oil to make it extra runny and delicious. And as you can see, this is super fresh and goes really great when spooned over the porchetta. To go along with the porchetta, I'm going to show you 2 amazing side dishes that complement this recipe perfectly. And the first is some roasted potatoes with some herb salt. We'll start off by making the herb salt, and I'm just chopping up some fresh rosemary and fresh thyme and adding them to a small mortar and pestle with some sea salt. And I'm doing about 1.5 tablespoons of sea salt, and I'm just going to use the pestle to grind everything together. As you continue to grind the salt and the herbs together, you will see it becomes a beautiful light green color, and that's how you know it's ready. So we're going to set the herb salt aside, and then we're going to prepare our potatoes. Here I'm using some new potatoes, both Yukon Gold and red potatoes, and these are super fresh and really flavorful this time of year, so they are my favorite. And all I'm doing to prepare these is just simply halve them and place them on a parchment-lined baking tray. Next, we'll drizzle the potatoes with about a tablespoon of olive oil, and then we'll sprinkle over that delicious herb salt that we just made. I'm doing about 2 teaspoons here to start because we're going to add a little bit more at the end as well. And then all you have to do is simply toss these to combine and then lay them cut side down across the baking sheet and space them out so that they're not touching so that they roast properly. This is a great recipe to make because potatoes pair so well with pork, and they can be made entirely in the time when the porchetta is resting. And to bake these potatoes, we're going to place them in the oven set at 400 degrees, and they'll take about 25 to 30 minutes to cook. You'll know they're done when they're nice and golden brown and crispy, just like this. So once they come out of the oven, I'm just simply going to arrange them on a serving platter, and then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more of that herb salt on top. A quick garnish of some rosemary on the side really pulls this dish together. The final side dish that I'll share with you today is for my sautéed green beans with Parmesan. After all that hard work in making the porchetta, I did want to include a really quick and easy side dish that had green vegetables and was easy to pull together. So all you have to do for this recipe is trim some beans. You can do this yourself. You can have your friends or your family help you as well. And then we'll set that aside and we'll prepare the garnish, which is a couple slices of lemon. There isn't lemon in this dish, but I do like the extra pop of color that it gives to this recipe. And I'm using up that lemon that we actually zested for our salsa verde. So I'm just cutting some really thin slices of lemon and then cutting them in half, and we'll set that aside for later to use as garnish. And cooking these sautéed green beans is super easy. All you do is preheat a pan over medium-high heat, and once it's hot, we add the olive oil and the green beans with a little bit of salt and pepper. And we continue to cook this and sauté and turn these for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll add a little splash of water just to kind of help the beans kind of cook through all the way to the center and steam properly. And you'll know the beans are cooked when they're bright green and just tender. So we'll remove those from the heat, and then we'll add them to a serving platter, which we'll then top off with a drizzle of olive oil, some grated Parmesan cheese, and those lemon slices just to add some extra color. This recipe is super easy and comes together in under 10 minutes, and it pairs perfectly with the porchetta. So once the roasted potatoes with herb salt and the sautéed green beans are ready, we are ready to plate up our porchetta, which is nicely rested. All the juices have got back into it, and it is delicious and still warm. To serve this up, all you have to do is cut slices, making sure to remove the cotton string as well. That is a very important step. But all I do is cut a couple slices and then arrange the rest of the pork loin on the platter just for a really nice presentation. I'll also garnish it with a little bit more parsley just for a pop of color. And then we're ready to take it to the table with our salsa verde. So that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching me make this homemade porchetta with salsa verde and my delicious roasted potatoes with herb salt and sautéed green beans with Parmesan. This is a really great menu to serve during the springtime, especially for celebrations like Easter, because the porchetta is really beautiful, feeds a lot of people, and of course the potatoes and green beans are super fresh and delicious and pair perfectly with the pork. You can find all 3 of these recipes with full measurements and directions on my blog, and I'll leave that linked in the description box below. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more delicious recipe videos like this one. Also, make sure to follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram and TikTok, where I share more recipe ideas and some home and garden content as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy spring!